Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hafidades and Tiro, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Harris, and today we're bringing back one of our guests. She's familiar to many of you that are involved in history here in the Northern Marianas, Rlene Santos Steffy. Rlene, welcome back to the show.
Hafidade, thank you. What did you say? Tiro? How do you
Tiro.
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 This is Carolinian for... literally, it means respect, but it's also a form of greeting.
Okay, so it starts with a D or a T?
A T.
A T, tero.
Yeah, tero.
Tero. I got to roll my tongue a little bit more.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So you can say that next time you present here.
I'll try. Have to practice.
Well, of course, you are an ethnographer, oral historian, research associate at Micronesian Area Research Center, and you have an exciting project, actually, that was introduced in DVD form this week or this past week in Guam called Tinaotao Marianas.
Season 1 and 2.
Season 1 and 2. What is this project all about?
Well, it began as an enrichment project for me. Every time scholars came to Guam from wherever they came to speak about their particular subject or interest, research, field of archaeology, history, genealogy, genetics, you name it, whatever. If they came as a guest to speak at a conference or something and I read about it in the paper, I would make an effort to contact them and ask them if I could interview them. And I really was only doing it because the dynamics of a one-on-one is very different from in a conference setting. Mm-hmm. And I always had questions when I would hear, reports of their being on Guam and things that they said or presented. And so I would ask them to sit with me, and they were always willing to do that. And it ended up being an oral history interview, of course, and gleaning so much information. And then I just put it away. I'd stored, and I was satisfied. And then Sabrina Salas, the anchor of KOAM TV News, started airing a half hour, they were maybe 5 or 10-minute vignettes from Ben Blas after he died, General Ben Blas, former congressman for Guam. And the people really responded to it. They were hungry for it.
What was he talking about?
He had vignettes that were culturally relevant. Maybe about I really don't remember all of them because there's so many of them, and I've never sat to watch all of them, but the people are hungry for relevant material. Historical material, cultural material, linguistic material, anything about us material. And so Sabrina brought this to the attention of Marie Calmoman, and she said, listen, the only person that I know who has a, a trove of this material or a collection of this material is Rlene Steffy. Why don't you call her and see if she's willing to do something? Do something took 2 years, really 2 years to determine how we were going to present it. It started as 5 minutes, and then it went to 15 minutes, and it went to an hour, and then it went to all kinds of ideas that we examined. And my concern was that, for me, my immersion needs are not always reflective of other people's needs. I mean, my attention span is really long. I could sit for hours and read a book. I don't have to get up and eat. Really, when I'm involved in something, I'm really, really very focused. But not everyone's like that. So I had to take that into account. And it's like, how are we going to present all this material? So what happened was we were working on a different project at the time, and I took my staff down to the Bank of Guam where these video cassettes are stored in safety deposit boxes.
Wow.
They're in a controlled environment.
Okay.
It's not the best environment for this, but it is the safest. And at the moment, that's where they are. So we laid it out in their largest conference room table, which is like huge for Bank of Guam. And we started separating them out by year, and we started separating them out by context. And there was this group that was like off to the right. The staff didn't know what to do with it. And finally, Fressy said, what are these? And I said, I don't know. They were names of people, like random names, but they were not associated to, like,
project,
like Catherine Perry Saipan,
Yeah.
right? Or Robert Hunter Saipan, or Scott Russell Saipan, names that you would affiliate to Saipan. They were just like Perry, Scott Russell, they were just random notes that I wrote down in the cover because I didn't intend to use them, Catherine. They were for my teaching instruction. They were my one-on-ones. And I put them away. And so I went over and I looked at it and I said, oh my goodness, this is what Marie is asking for. And so we cataloged it, and I had to sit down and, look at it again.
About how many hours do you remember? How much of this stuff you
There's
had?
20 of them that we use for this project. Okay? So for example, on the 30th, we're featuring Scott Russell and Robert Hunter. I have interviewed Robert Hunter, I would say 5 times in my visits to Saipan. And I interviewed Scott Russell maybe 3 times in my trips to Saipan. So each trip would be 2 hours, 3 hours. So there's a lot of hours that I've researched and sat and talked to them. And this is all work related, what they do, like with Robert when he was at the museum, what the museum collections were about, the crash of the Consolacion, the materials, things like that. Growing up on Saipan, being of Carolinian Caucasian descent, and then just that adaptability of being in Guam, in Saipan, and then with the Carolinians and the Chamorro and the political history and his activism and artwork, and just all this comes out.
Almost anything he wanted to talk about?
Exactly, because that's what oral history is about. It's life story. It's about a personal development and all the challenges that come along with that development, both the professional, the personal, the familial, right? And so whatever an individual is willing to share with me is something that I capture. And they all understand that in the work that I do, whether it's in the articles in the column, features in the newspaper, postings on the website, YouTube, or video documentaries, or publications, books, that whatever I capture their information for, they will get a copy of that at the end production. And so I'm giving them a set. And every participant in Tinaotao Marianas 1, 2, and 3 will get 5 copies of this set. Now, each DVD is a 3 DVD set. There are 12 episodes, 12 half-hour episodes that we play every month, and they run here on Saipan. They run in the CNMI. They're on Docomo. I don't know what channel because I don't watch it here, but I know that they air here because people email me and said, oh, I saw the show, and they like it.
So that's 12 episodes per season?
Per year. A season is 1 year.
Okay.
And then at the end of every year, we do what we call a wrap-up, or like an overview, kind of composite, what we discussed and who discussed it and things like that. So the first wrap-up was with between me and Jason Salas at KOAM. And the second wrap-up is with me and my cousin Laura Sauter. And so I have yet to decide who the third wrap-up will be. And at the moment, we season 3 will end in September. We do the wrap-up in October, and then we publish and print in November and get it back. So the question now is, do we do a 4th season? Or do we change up? Is it time for a change up? Because Tinaotao Marianas is called the Peopling of the Marianas, remember? And so this started in 1521 with the discovery of Magellan in his circumnavigation effort of the world. And it's going to take us right up into the Spanish-American War, 1898. Now,
that's through season...
That's 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
Yeah. So in season 3, at the moment, we are discussing the first diaspora of the Chamorro Intramicronesia These people came from Saipan and Guam, moved into Yap, Palau, and Pohnpei, and survived World War II there. And then after World War II, they come out of those locations back into the CNMI or to Guam. Some of them during the German administration were sent to PNG. And then when PNG became independent in 1985 or 81, I think it's 81, in fact, something like that, they offered them to be sent back to the Northern Marianas or Guam. Unfortunately, because generations have passed and these ones no longer have any familial connection or property for them to relocate back, they elected to remain citizens of the British Crown and therefore sent down to Australia. And so they're dispersed. They're all over. They're in Cairns, they're in Sydney, they're in Brisbane, and they've elected to stay there. They know that power structure. They know that culture. Some of them have traveled to Guam numerous times, and I've met some of them. But I interviewed about 20 down there. And I believe the College of the Marianas also sent a delegation down when Herbert Rosario, and I think even my cousin Mike Fleming might have been one of them, who went down there and interviewed them. What they've done with those interviews, I don't know. I've tried to locate them, to include them in the documentary, but they don't seem to be accessible for some reason. So that's why I went down. I went on my own. I told my husband, I said, I can't get it. I don't know where they are. It's easier for me to fly down. And he says, go. So off I went.
So you're not really going to leave us hanging with season 3. You are going to have a season 4, right?
You know, I don't know that we're going to have a season 4 because season 4 will take us right to the first American Naval Administration, right? And so I don't know that I want to do an American Naval Administration because that's kind of like, it's not ancient history, and it's really easily documented. It's easily accessible, and there are other historical periods or frameworks or interests that I have that I would like to work on. For example, there's the history of leprosy in the Marianas and all the people that were part of that. I have all the documentation for it. I flew down to New Zealand. I interviewed the physician who was the head in Tinian. He gave me all the paperwork and the images. I interviewed a lot of people who, during the Trust Territory period, were sent to be taught how to work with this disease, and they were more like practitioners. They weren't really medical physicians, but they were practitioners. But for the time, our people called them docs, right? So they sent them, I think it was down to Pohnpei, and then, if I remember correctly, Fiji. And it really just kind of wraps the southern Pacific islands together. And of course, there's the history of the leprosy colony in Tinian and in Thanapak, which was the first one here. So pulling that comes out in season 2, I believe, or maybe even season 1. And so there's that historical framework from which we can continue. There's also other things. I mean, we produced Meningan, the Meningan March and Concentration Camp, and that came out last year. My goal is to finish the Guam massacre sites, which is hopefully going to come out in July. And then, there's the Chamorro books that I'm publishing, the culturally relevant stories, the Chamorro stories in Chamorro, in the Chamorro language of children, for children level from elementary, kinder to 6th grade. So there's a lot that I'm trying to clear the table with, and
you have a lot on your plate, basically.
Well, there's a lot on the table. It's really a fiesta plate of historical stuff, but it's good. There's variety, and there's interest.
So what does it mean, do you think, what will it mean for the communities in Guam and in the Northern Marianas having this now available in DVD format?
Well, for me, very personal, because my mother was born in Saipan. My grandparents got married in Guam and moved here and established businesses here. And then my mother and her siblings were born here and survived World War II here. So for me, it's home. It's my mom's home. It's my people's, if you will, right? And then my father's from Guam. And then, of course, before 1950 and the establishment of the Organic Act, my grandfather and grandmother decided they needed to bring the kids home to become U.S. citizens, and that's historical in itself. There's the Saipan connection. So when I was a talk show host, I brought in those connections because I grew up with that. I grew up with knowing that I was a part of Saipan. I'm a part of Palau. I'm a part of Yap. I'm a part of Guam. And I never had any cultural biases. That cross-cultural identification was, for me, natural because I was raised with that concept. I had always been with Palauans and Carolinians, and I was always with Filipinos and Japanese. I didn't even know that they were different, because I grew up with them. It wasn't until high school did I learn that there was a difference. And at that point, it didn't matter to me, right? So what does it mean that we have this collective history? It means that we are one people. We have one language. We have one reality. We have different ways of expressing that reality. We have different political developments that have taken that reality and make it become what it is today. But we're still the same people. My son and I went to Herman's Bakery for breakfast this morning, and he's beginning to learn how to speak Chamorro in the University of Guam. And we were just sitting there listening to these two women just go at it. And even on Guam, when that happens, it's a really neat experience. Like when you hear your language spoken in Carolinian, it's nice. I like that diversity. I like hearing all the different languages. I don't find offense when Filipinos speak to each other. I really think that's neat. Carolinians or Chinese or Japanese, Koreans. I love the blur. I like the blur. I like the cacophony of voices and the different sounds and the different staccato and there's just a certain kind of music that comes with that. And I really like that. I don't need to understand what they're saying, and I'm certainly not sensitive enough to think they're talking about me. So I really enjoy that. But our reality, as close as we are, is the same. And I think that, will we ever see a unification of the Mariana Islands? I don't know that we've ever been divided. Historically, I see it as one. I don't see a real big difference. And so I think that the more we try to find commonalities with each other rather than focusing on the differences, that's going to help us in the long run. And, there are historians and there are political pundits and there are economists who say that the only way that the Mariana Islands can survive is through unification. We're already U.S. You're a Commonwealth. We're a territory.
Well, we're speaking about the TV documentary Tinaotao Marianas, which highlights the common history of the entire Mariana Islands up through season 3. And we're sitting with producer Rlene Santos Steffy. We'll be back after this break.
Half a day. This is Eulalia Areola of the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. Did you know that you can donate up to $5,000 to the Humanities Council through the CNMI Education Tax Credit Program? Donations from individuals and corporations qualify and can be used to offset your local wage and salary tax, BGRT, and earnings tax. Call our office at 235-4785 to see how you can support humanities programs in our community and obtain a tax credit for your donation. Sizuus Maasi, Olomai, and thank you.
Welcome back to your Humanities Half Hour. We're speaking today with the producer of the TV documentary Tinaotao Marianas about the history of the Marianas, Rlene Santos Steffy. Rlene, who are some of the players featured in this documentary?
There are 20 that were selected. There was about 50 that were considered. And it was a tough call.
That's a long consideration.
It was. Like I said, it took me 2 years to figure out how to do it. So what I did was I isolated the Spanish scholars because...
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, right? 1521, why would I bring in the Japanese scholars? So I brought in the Spanish scholars. And I think that the powerhouse scholars for this project were Carlos Madrid. Carlos Madrid published a book and has done a lot of research, materials, going through the documents, the Spanish documents, and then not just in Guam, but also in the Philippines and in Madrid. Atienza, David Atienza, another powerhouse scholar for the project. He's an anthropologist. Madrid is a historian, history major. And both of these men are PhDs, but both of them also teach. And Madrid is now in the university, is in the Philippines, working in one of the museums, that a Spanish museum, and their focus is to promote the Spanish language and the Latin culture. So this is something that, again, with their reality in the Philippines, very, very close to home, right? They have interest there. Atienza is an anthropologist at the University of Guam, and his research, he's a missionary. He came to Guam as a neo. And so his focus is more toward the church, the history, how these Jesuits, what they did, and how it was how people responded to what they did. I think the reason for my putting him in there is because there's also Fran Hiesel, who's a Catholic Jesuit. And if you know these men the way I know them, there's no blurring. There's no division. When we sit down and talk to each other, there's no. They work together very well.
You versus us. There's no you.
There's
versus
no
us.
you versus us. I'm a Jehovah's Witness, and I get along very well with them because we respect each other's difference. But that's our strength, is that we are professionals in that we don't let those labels distract what our mission is. And our mission is to be able to relay the history, to relay and to be able to look at something with a lens, a neutral lens, rather than a biased lens, because we're all biased by human nature. But we're not an apologist for anyone by any stretch of the imagination. It is what it is. Now, there's the controversy of, was San Vitores killed was he martyred, or was he killed because he trespassed? Did he take his role as a missionary above the respect of the local people? Did he push his way through? Some people will say he had no business. The man already said, I don't want you to baptize my child, and you come in and you convinced my wife. There's free agency there. That's something that people don't really look at, is that in the history, women are not given a voice. They're almost like they don't exist, but we know they're there. Matrilineal society, we know that they were there. But, who writes the history gets to depict, right? So I think today, if you look at the way things are coming out, Catherine, you're going to see that there is no way you can ignore women anymore. It's just not wise to do that, because they really do contribute much more. Look at us. You're hosting a show. I was on a show for K57 for 10 years. I've been writing since 1994 in every medium, in print, magazine, and newspaper. I'm producing a television show. But I never did it because of a feminist effort. I'm not a feminist by any stretch of the imagination. I do it because I have the opportunity, and it doesn't come out. That's not my mantra. I'm not a bra burning, advocate. There's a purpose for things. But with these men, and even Anne Hattori. And if you watch Anne Hattori in the production, she's pretty hard. She comes out and she says things the way they are.
And what is her area of expertise?
She's history. She's in history at the University of Guam. And so, she brings out the fact that where are the women here? These guys are doing certain things. They're creating problems. They're shaking the cultural norms. Of course people are going to be up in arms, and she doesn't cut any slack at all. Then we have Elmira Bruno Perry, Spanish trained to be a lawyer. She's from Colombia, and she looks at the documents and reads the documents with Marjorie Driver, and these women also contribute their perspective. And Marjorie talks about the nomenclature of the Marianas, how they were named, all first named after saints. Every island was a saint something, right? And then eventually, we understand even from the maps. And for a very long time, I would hear people tell me that Americans are the ones that started spelling it differently. So I started to do the research. When I hear those absurd statements like that, that's over the hill for me. When you're just blaming one and taking no responsibility for anything. So I went in and looked at the maps, and the maps were actually done by Spanish, and then the Americans just adopted them and they never changed them. So Maritzo, for example, should be Malesso, but it's Maritzo. The Spanish changed it to Maritzo. Or Humatac, it's Humatic, and Aganya, it should have been Hagatnya. Or Hogget, it's Agate. Those were not changed by the Americans. The Americans just adopted it, and it's like, why change it? Yeah. Spanish is the one that did it, yeah.
So, which scholars from the Northern Marianas are included in the documentary? You mentioned, I
two of my
Robert
favorite,
Hunter,
Robert Hunter and Scott Russell, and I didn't have the opportunity. There were more I wanted to bring in, but I just didn't have the opportunity. Part of the reason was that after the 2 years, that took too long, and I was doing other projects, and then I needed to make a decision and get moving, and so it's like, okay, crunch time, like adrenaline up to the throat. What are we going to do? Okay, let's go. We're going to go with these guys, and I was glad that we got them. I'm glad we included them because, Robert, like I said, with his genetic background, he was able to bring in the Carolinian perspective. We interviewed Lino Olipa, your uncle. We interviewed him, but it didn't. His interviews have the Carolinian arrival and the canoe and the more political development of why the Carolinians spoke Chamorro so clearly. What was it that motivated the Carolinians to speak Chamorro? Where Chamorros never really went out to speak Carolinian. So I thought that was a little odd. Well, what was the reason for this? And we spoke to a few other people about that. And, of course, the political reality, you cannot come to the CNMI or to Saipan because you're not indigenous and not learn the indigenous language. You've got to learn it. You need to know what the indigenous people are deciding about your culture or your people. So it was a survival technique for them. And I thought that was very insightful. Wow, good for you guys. And then eventually the merging. I mean, it's almost blurred here. I think I mentioned to you in Guam, you will never hear a Filipino say that I'm indigenous to Guam. You'll never hear a Korean or Japanese or any other migration of people say they're indigenous to Guam. In Saipan, they do. And whether the reduction of the Chamorros to Guam and eventual return in the German period had something to do with that, and the Carolinians being here in between, that's fine. But they're still migrated after the Chamorros were here. And how you live here, it's up to you.
What is it you hope people will take away from watching this DVD series?
Learn the facts rather than make up the story. There's enough of a diversity and interest in the actual development of how things are. We don't need to make up facts. And that's what it was before. I mean, I would hear all kinds of things about how things are. And I would just sit and think, that doesn't make any sense at all. And then, what I've learned in this whole series is that the personality, the values, the background, and the way you interpret what you read has a factor in how you're going to express something, right? Mm-hmm. But if you look at what they all say, you sit them down and you listen to what they're saying or read what they're saying the same thing. Some people are a little bit more interested in one aspect than the other. Or the highlight, okay, whatever, that kind of attitude. But it's there. And so I think you're going to walk away with a better appreciation of what happened. You're going to walk away with where these materials are located and how you can get a hold of them. And you're going to learn that what we have about our history is only the tip of the iceberg. We really don't have all the materials in the Marianas.
And speaking of which, how can people get a copy of the DVD?
Well, Scott Russell and Robert Hunter decided that I should come back and do a release. So we're working on that date, and we'll probably have that release over at the Memorial, which is really the best place for a presentation. Okay. So I'm looking forward to that. I'd like the people of the Marianas to have copies of this.
All right. Any final thoughts before we go?
Yes. I would like to also see this in schools because I know that the Department of Education is going to adapt it, and we're working on the curriculum to teach it. Because, if you just give it to a teacher, they're not going to know what to do with it. Play a video. Okay, what?
It would be a lot easier for the teachers
Yes,
if you provided
and we
the
want to give them
curriculum.
the
Thank
aids to do that. So, yeah, we're looking at
you. It
that.
sounds like a great resource, really.
It is. I'm
Yeah.
very proud of it. Everyone that's been part of it is also very proud of it. So, this is teamwork. We don't live in a vacuum. We don't live in a cave.
Well, we've been speaking today with Rlene Santos Steffy, the producer of the documentary Tinaotao Marianas. Rlene, thank you for your time,
My
and
pleasure.
thank you for this wonderful project.
Yes, thank you for having me. Nice being here.
This has been Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Harris.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.